Hi, guys. I wanted to talk about my thoughts on the political compass and the political spectrum, as some people define it. I don't believe in horseshoe theory. I don't believe in the political compass. I don't believe in the political spectrum anymore either. I used to. I think now, what I've seen, based on what I've read, based on what I've thought about, conversations I've had, I believe that the real spectrum is simply statism or not statism, or authoritarianism and the lack of that. I wouldn't even call it libertarianism. I think that the reason why I believe this why I think it's important is because there is a lot of what we would call infighting going on the supposed right wing. But I don't think we have a right wing. I think we just have a non left wing. People like to say dismissive statements like, "Oh, they're two wings on the same shit bird. I'm not on either side. I'm libertarian," as though this is somehow a transcendental fourth dimensional position to take outside of that completely like primitive and caveman like state of being. It's not the way we work. I'm sorry. You're going to have to humble yourself and look at the actual issues and determine where it places you, and don't worry about what it means. I think the reason for this is because the left has defined the terms. Remember, we learned all of these things in academia. We learned them from our instructors, our professors, our teachers, most of whom were leftists. So they get to define the terms. We see it all around us on our social media, on the internet, on television, in film, in our music, in our politicians. Most of us have bought into it and operate within that frame. But I don't think it's accurate. Even the people who try to escape the frame by calling themselves ANCAPs or some, transcendental title are not actually outside of the real discussion. They just don't want to be associated with it because they know that there can be a lot of negativity directed at them from it. I mean, do you think that having a Gadsden flag makes you a Nazi? The left does. Well, why do they think that? You would think that there is no association between those things, and you would be right. And yet they still use it. Why? Well, because the only real political spectrum is left and non left. That's all it is. Or you could say statism and the lack of statism, or the feminine and the masculine. Now, why do I say this? Well, I got this tweet that kind of like sums this up, but I've been thinking about this for a long time. So, a friend of mine on Twitter named Richard, he has an account on Twitter called Disabled Cell because he is an incel with a disability. And he made a post which is sort of uncharacteristic of what he usually posts, which said, "What's wrong with being right wing? What's about it?" Sort of saying, like, what's the problem with it, I suppose. And of course, someone responded and said, "In your case, hierarchy. Equal representation is what incels want, right? Look at history. As the world gets more left, it gets better, and vice versa." And I said, "Disagree." And they said, "That happens, care to flesh it out?" And I said, "I can go into more detail, but all I will say here is leftism doesn't mean the good things." Right? And this person goes on to sort of make a statement that says, well, all of politics is BS anyway, because he wasn't winning the argument. He said, "I think I'm using a pretty general but useful definition. But it can be confusing because politics is by definition a field where everyone deliberately tries to mislead. My definition is right equals hierarchy and left equals equality. As people have become more equal, things have gotten better." Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Have they gotten better? What does equality mean? I used to think that equality was a good thing. Now, I don't think it is. I think it's terrible. I think it And I don't care if it's equality of opportunity or equality of outcome. Equality of opportunity is bullshit. Equality of opportunity, the success of equality of opportunity can only be measured by looking at the outcomes, which means it's still equality of outcome. The only thing that you can do to give people the best opportunity is simply remove obstacles, but that doesn't mean everything will be equal. In fact, it probably won't be. So if it doesn't shake out that way, what do you do then? This is why the equality of opportunity conversation never ends, because people are not satisfied with the outcomes, which means they're really concerned about outcomes, not opportunities. Equality is just about tearing people who are great down. I say this as somebody who's pretty poor, and I wouldn't consider myself all that great. So I'm not saying this to pump myself up. I'm just observing reality and stating it as it is. I would rather live in a world where the best of us do best, and those who try become satisfied. And maybe satisfaction with your place in the world is more important and more attainable than equality is. So, equality is leftism, according to this person, and leftism is the good things, but I've already demonstrated that equality is not necessarily good. So leftism can't be the good things. So then what is it? Well, it's simple. It's statism. It's using the state to force equality or to force new standards. And that's the only thing the state can do. The state is simply an implement of force. It sends men with guns to your house to take your resources to use the way that they see fit. You might think that what they're using it for is good because you want to see some positive change. Maybe you believe in abortion should be paid for, should be free. I'll put it in free because that's how people like to word these things. Abortion should be free. Healthcare should be free. Housing should be free, right? Food should be free. Childcare should be free. So what does that mean? Well, nothing is free. It just means that the state takes tax dollars. And tax dollars are not optional. Tax dollars are not charitable. They're not something that somebody gives because they're feeling generous. They are a show of force, right? So leftism, which forces equality and forces positive rights, is just statism. Even if you like the things that they're doing, it doesn't change the fact that it's authoritarian statism. The lack of statism would be what some would call right wing, although I don't like the term because I think it's a little bit too broad. And I will explain why. Have you ever noticed that people who the left calls the right? Have you ever noticed that the people on the so-called right disagree on a tremendous number of things? They veer off, not only because they're not necessarily on the right. Even some of those people that are called the right would still call themselves on the left. For example, Shoe on Head is probably far right compared to the left, even though she would call herself a liberal or a leftist. Classical liberals like James Lindsay, like Gad Saad, like Joe Rogan, maybe, like Dave Rubin, are also called right-wing conservatives, right? Why? Well, because they don't agree with everything the left promotes. Even some conservatives, like Tomi Lahren, she's pro-choice. So she doesn't fit neatly into that box either. She likes guns. Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly was all on board with the Me Too movement, and she's a feminist. I mean, most people are feminists. Feminism is a form of leftism. It might be mild in some places or some examples, but generally it's left of center if we're going to look at it that way. Daily Wire guys and Steven Crowder guys, which are kind of like old school conservatives or right wingers, or you have neocons, or you have people like paleo conservatives, like the Vincent from the Red Elephants or Mark Dice. But these people don't like each other. In a lot of ways, they fight each other all the time. But the left, they're generally on the same page. Sometimes they expel some of their own because they're not pure enough, like Anna Kasparian. This is the thing that I think people miss, is that the left is generally unified, even if it's a shrinking group of people. And everyone else is so busy trying to like distance themselves from being far right that they're not focused on the real problems, the real enemy here, because they're too busy saying, look, I'm not a right winger, but I'm not a conservative, but that doesn't matter. The left has decided it. Goes back to what I was saying before. Why do you think having a Gadsden flag makes you a Nazi? Why do you think having an American flag makes you a Nazi? Why do you think like being a trucker that wants to be able to do his job and not lose it in Canada makes you a racist Nazi? You think it doesn't make sense. You think that if you just explain it, people will be like, oh yeah, you're totally not that. That doesn't matter. You have been cast in this role because you don't toe the line. No pun intended. So, what's the real spectrum? In my opinion, it's like I said before, it's the left and the non-left. And I have this excerpt from a book that was written in 1995 that explains just that. First, it's going to mention something about capitalism, which is another topic that I really think needs addressing, and we should stop using the word. This is what my particular interest is in choosing the appropriate words to discuss topics, because the left, which controls language and has had a lot of control over language for a long time, they have redefined terms. They have created language, vocabulary rather, that has prevented us from having real discussions. So, naming names. Numerous issues are preempted, and numerous gaps in logic papered over, simply by the names they are given to various things. Capitalism, the left, the right, human rights, etc. A few examples may be suggestive as to how easily the need for either logic or evidence can be circumvented by a simple repetition of names that dulls people's awareness so that they literally do not know what they are talking about. Capitalism. Since capitalism was named by its enemies, it is perhaps not surprising that the name is completely misleading. Despite the name, capitalism is not an ism. It is not a philosophy, it's an economy. Ultimately, it's nothing more and nothing less than an economy not run by political authorities. There are no capitalist institutions. Any number of institutional ways of carrying out economic activities may flourish under capitalism that is in the absence of control from above. You may get food from a restaurant, or by buying it from the supermarket and cooking it yourself, or by growing the food on your own land and processing it all the way through to the dinner table. Each of these is just as much capitalism as the others. At any given time, caravan supermarkets or computerized shopping methods may be used, but none of these is anything more than a modality of the moment. They do not define capitalism, but are simply one of the innumerable ways of doing things when choices are unconstrained by authorities. Many have argued that capitalism does not offer a satisfactory moral message, but that is like saying that calculus does not contain carbohydrates, amino acids, or other essential nutrients. Everything fails by irrelevant standards, yet no one regards this as making calculus invalid or illegitimate. Once again, the selective application of arbitrary standards is invoked only when it promotes the vision of the anointed. The political left and right. Among the many thoughtless labels which have gained currency, the dichotomy between the political left and the political right is one of the most striking, not only for its wide acceptance, but also for its utter lack of definition or even an attempt at definition. Only the left is defined, initially by the kinds of ideas held by those who sat on the left side of the French National Assembly in the 18th century. But while the left is defined, at least in its general sense, the dichotomy itself remains undefined because the right remains undefined. Those who oppose the left are said to be on the right, and when they are strongly opposed or oppose across a broad spectrum of issues, they are said to be on the far right. But this is a somewhat Ptolemaic view of the political universe, with the political left being in the center of that universe and all who differ in any direction being called the right. Whether free market libertarians or statists ranging from those with monarchist to fascist views, opponents of the left are called the right. In the United States, especially, the related term conservative is routinely used to encompass people who have no desire to preserve the status quo or to return to some status quo ante. Friedrich Hayek, for more than a half a century, a prime opponent of leftist policies on the international stage, was thus considered a conservative, if not part of the far right. Yet Hayek himself wrote an article entitled "Why I Am Not a Conservative." Not that it matters. Milton Friedman was likewise repudiated the conservative label and wrote a book entitled "The Tyranny of the Status Quo." So he was going against the status quo, but he was called a conservative because he was also going against leftism. Yet he is regarded as the leading conservative intellectual of his age, though many of the things he advocates have never existed in any society, or, like school vouchers, did not exist when he first advocated them. Not exactly conservative if you're doing something brand new. Among so-called black conservatives, it is virtually impossible to find anyone who wants to go back to anything, this group being oppressed to both the racial discrimination policies of the past and the racial preference policies that came after them. This book is called The Vision of the Anointed, and it was written in 1995, or released in 1995. And these are the same talking points that we're still dealing with today. So, I don't believe in the spectrum. I don't believe in the compass. I believe that there is statism and there is a lack of statism. That's it. And as far as social policies go or social values go, I think they vary from person to person. No one is truly conservative 100% and no one is truly liberal 100% because you can't actually be like ultimately what's the purest form of conservatism is living in a cave, I suppose, off the land as a hunter-gatherer. And the true meaning of liberal is allowing everything, every drug, every sexual degenerate thing, everything. No one is like that. No one is like those things. Everyone kind of swims around in the middle someplace, and you have to ask them about their individual issues. And none of these are really political unless you're planning on getting the state involved. So it's kind of pointless to discuss things from a conservative or liberal perspective. I prefer there's just one way to look at it. There is statism and a lack of statism. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Thanks so much for listening. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I will talk to you all in the next one. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment.